two or three of these, which are smaller and smaller in their scope in terms of our concern with them. Most all of these, including the first couple and number 10 and others, we would need a whole night to do just on that amendment. Of course, we don't have that, so I apologize for it being just kind of a real snapshot. And in the case of some of them, I just finally said, wait a minute, I don't have enough time here either. And if I hand you 100 pages, you're all going to go, Lord have mercy. We're not going to try to do that in one night, are we? So there were 3 or 4 of them where I just said, here's the heading of that particular amendment. I've called it free people suicide. I've borrowed this from Abraham Lincoln. He says, of course, some 60 plus years after the Constitution is framed, if destruction be our lot, we must ourselves be its author and finisher. As a nation of free men, we must live through all time or die by suicide. So what was Lincoln saying? He said, well, I'm not concerned about the outside forces. If we don't hold the liberty and what the fathers and framers did, and we lose sight of that, then we will commit our own suicide. So that has to do with what we're looking at tonight in terms of knowledge. The question founders believed that this grand experiment that we talked about, they believed it could remain free forever. There just had to be a whole lot of criteria that stayed in place. How was this to be done, and are Americans doing that today? Well, I think we can say, are Americans doing that today? And answer that question pretty affirmatively, no. Largely we're not. We've got to first know what the constitutional rights are before we can begin to keep those freedoms. In free governments, Franklin said, the rulers are the servants. That's a novel thought now in our country. The rulers are the servants, and the people their superiors and sovereigns. Visionaries like Jefferson and Madison saw that the independence from Britain afforded the American people a great chance to once again grab a hold of rights regarded as supreme laws of nature. We talked about that especially when it came to Locke and others, of a government for themselves created by a supreme law that was paramount in all ways to it, yet unalterable by it. That's a quote from a gentleman named Sean Patrick. So out of this, again, came a different constitution. We've talked about that over and over again, especially in the first few weeks. A cardinal law that would serve as the foundation of government, that would limit all branches of government, again, deriving that from Locke and others, that was unalterable by the legislative authority. In other words, they couldn't override that. You'd have these 3 branches, and they would guard against one another. The first draft of the Constitution was done in 1787. Remember again that for nearly 100 days they labored in this room with no doors, well, doors, but those were closed and no windows, because they did not want the outside world knowing and help potentially screw it up before it ever got started. But it fell short in terms of some vital components, a positive statement of inalienable rights that would be guaranteed to all citizens. Jefferson was the driving force, and if history says he got much pushback. So as esteemed as Jefferson was, and as much as the framers believed they had been carried along by the Lord in framing this document, Jefferson believed it was still short. Not everybody was in agreement with that. I hope we've outlined it enough to say, if we view this as these 55 or so framers in an ongoing kumbaya moment, it's to miss it. These were strong men with strong ideas and strong passion. But in the final analysis, though, they came together. We're going to set aside what I believe we should have had in here, not had in here, and we are going to unite as the United States of America and stand against all opposition, internal or external, which you don't see today. Now it's who can win the latest day. It's not that they're not going to have differences. They had differences. They had strong, strong differences. As we've said, the southern states had strong differences because of slavery. Washington wanted it gone. Jefferson wanted it gone. So when folks say, well, they talked out of both sides of their mouth, no, they understood we can't get this thing sealed If we don't, we're going to split before we ever get started. Now, of course, it is to be not a whole lot of decades later that it does over that issue. But they, in the compromise, and I know that gets to be kind of a dirty word, they understood we can't even get this started if we can't come to some agreement. So if remember I said a few weeks ago, the southern states wanted every slave counted as one person, just as a free man. Why did they want that? Because they would have had more power from a legislative standpoint. They finally agreed on every slave counted as 3/5 of a person. Again, nobody's saying agreeing with that would have been done that way, but that was because if they had more people in the populace, they could send more in the right to their congressional, right, just as we do now. That's not, changed and altered some over the years, but that was the point. So, again, back to the inalienable rights and the Bill of Rights, Jefferson said, we've not done enough here. This needs to be thought through further, and got pushback. So there was 2 years, so it wasn't like they did this in a couple of days. This was 2 years again where they argued back and forth whether we need something further. At the end, the American Bill of Rights is added to the Constitution. These were to guard against the abuse of great rights of mankind that Madison called them. Richard Henry Lee and James Madison observed that mere paper barriers might fail. Listen, these guys were not naive to think that just because we've done this Constitution, that it's going to save us forever. They understood that, again, we've talked about that in terms of the three pillars, as it were, that they talk about in terms of preserving it and so forth. It would serve as an effective education of the people because it taught the truths of freedom that must remain inviolate for there to be any freedom at all. Jefferson said this, and that's why we're certainly trying to do what we've done over these weeks in terms of faith in the founding. But in his infinite wisdom all those years ago said, education that informs the whole mass of people, they are the only sure reliance for the preservation of our liberty. An educated, well-informed, truthfully informed mass of people is the only sure reliance that this thing is going to be preserved. That it would in effect go south when we become ignorant of things. As today, what does the Constitution say about this? What does it allow us to do here? What does it not allow? Jefferson knew that the education of folks would have to be paramount all the way through. Author Philip Dick once wrote, "The basic tool for the manipulation of reality is the manipulation of words. Words matter." Let me give you a couple. These are present for today. Well, they've been present for today for a long time. Fetus. Right? Right. Fetus. Not baby, not human, fetus. So our populace, especially young people, have heard that for a long enough period of time that we have been manipulated. The reality of those words is that that's not yet a human being. It's a fetus, right? That's the power of words. If you cross our border now illegally, you are an undocumented alien. Come on, right? The power of words. Not an illegal intruder in our country, an undocumented alien. Does that make a difference? I got a chance to listen to part of this today. It was with, I guess it must have been on Tucker Carlson last night, and I didn't see that. The Congress is trying to pass a bill right now that is one of the most egregious bills I have ever heard. It is staggering in terms of the rights of those coming across. They could not, first of all, unless they murdered somebody, they couldn't be deported. And if they deport them for any reason that ultimately the state and the courts would find unacceptable, we would have to pay to bring them back. Listen, guys, that's only part of it. It goes beyond crazy, and signed off on right now by 2/3 of the Congress, all Democrat, by the way. In other words, they would, and free education, so much of them getting that right now. Now, you can't get that. I can't get that. In effect, what would happen with this, and he's not, if you know Tucker, he's not one for hyperbola. He just says, here's what it is. You and I and everybody else as citizens would ultimately have less rights than the undocumented. So go find that. It's that bill. I assume it has a bill number now because you say, well, that'll never pass the Senate. We'll see what happens in November, but anyway. So the basic tool of manipulation in reality is the manipulation of words. If you can control the meaning of words, you can control the people who must use those words. So undocumented alien, fetus, just follow the science. Just shut up and listen to the science. Okay. As I said a few weeks ago, I said, listen, I'm not a doctor. I don't play one on TV. But about 3 weeks into this thing, maybe a month, I understand we were all, forgive my French, but they scared the hell out of all of us first couple of weeks. The hospital's going to be overrun and so on and so forth. And then they kept saying, well, we're just following the science. And finally I said, wait a minute. You may be right in all this, but don't tell me we're following the science. There is no science for this. This is a gigantic global experiment. This has never been done, where the entire world is shut down rather than taking out the sick out of the society. So you may be right. You may be right. All the talking heads, you may be right. I'm not in that early on, so you could be right. But don't tell me it's science. It's not science. It's never been done before, so don't tell me it's science. But now it's science. It's science. It's science. It's science. You control the meaning of the words. You can control the people who must use those words. So we're going to look at some of the words, not in all these, because we're simply not going to have enough time in these amendments. We're going to look at some of, I think, the more important ones. Concept is relevant as it relates to the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. Again, when it comes to words. Madison, again, in his, I want to have several coffee sessions with James Madison. And I will listen and not talk because he's way smarter. Anyway, Madison said, do not separate text from historical background. That's being done today. You hear the left constantly talking about an evolving document, a maturing, evolving document, as if the Constitution, what it says now, is altogether different than what it says that Madison and Jefferson and Roger Sherman and on and on and on, what they thought it to mean. It's evolving. Madison said, no, don't do that. Don't separate the text from the historical background. If you do, here's what will happen, Madison said, as my iPad jumped. If you do, you will have perverted and subverted the Constitution, which can only end in a distorted, watch this now, bastardized form of illegitimate government. Madison cut to the chase, didn't he? If you do, you'll end up with a distorted, bastardized form of an illegitimate government. That I just described to you, that is a bill now being presented to our Congress, points to an illegitimate government. Absolutely, an illegitimate government. Okay, number one, First Amendment, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof or abridging the freedom of speech or the press or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. Franklin said, without freedom of thought, there can be no such thing as wisdom and no such thing as public liberty without freedom of speech. Okay, let's look at some of these. We're going to look just real quickly, some of these words, because again, they mean something. Abridge, to reduce or lessen in duration, extent, or range, authority, etc., to diminish. He said they're not to do that. Any declaration of speech is any declaration of thoughts, whether by words or other means. Petition, to ask some favor, right, or other benefit from a person or group of persons in authority or power by submitting formal written request, often containing the names of the people making request. You hear they petitioned the court for some kind of hearing or understanding what they believed was unjust, to petition the court. Redress, the setting right of what was wrong, often by giving something considered equal to the loss, injury, suffering, lack, etc. So the Establishment Clause, or the separation of church and state, now we hear that one all the time now, all the time. Separation of church and state, separation of church and state, separation of church and state. Again, that's when you hear the words mean something, especially if they're used in certain ways that aren't right. So the framers intended to prevent religious inequality. They did not want a state government-run church, which they had experienced in England. You were either an Anglican or you were a heathen. That was it. You had no other choice. So you had certain prescriptions that you had to do in terms of that. And restrictions of free exercise of religious conscience, and that rightly included a prohibition of government establishing a national religion. Now, we all understand it's going far beyond that now in terms of the establishment, what they believe to be the Establishment Clause and the separation of church and state. So now you cannot put up a creche, a manger scene in your city proper on city public property, right? That gets fought on a constant basis. Why? Because they say that's separation of what? Church and state. So that local government is establishing religion. So now you've got to put up a menorah for the Jewish, and you've got to do something for this group and that group. And of course, the city's not going to do that. They take, again, we looked at this early on, when Jefferson responded to the Danbury Baptist Association, he talked about this severe separation. They then interpret that as, here he was saying, you can't muddy those up. But Jefferson, all of them were saying, no, the government has no right to dictate anything to the church. There were some, like Madison, who believed that once this was written, you couldn't even count a preacher in the census. Did you know that? I didn't know that until they put them in such a position that said, no, you're not even going to count them. For a good sense, not in a bad sense. Understand, that was for good. That was Madison saying, this is good. You have no right to speak to them in any manner of government, including count them. So Madison looked at it as a positive, not a negative. Are you tracking? Now that ultimately didn't fly, but that was Madison's. Many of the things they would propose ultimately didn't get final in the final writing, as it were. So remember, all the states, again, all had to ratify the Constitution, right? Or all 9 of them had to ratify it. And of course, the framers wanted all 13. They wanted this to be 100% consensus. But it could have been done if only 9 states had ratified the Constitution. All of them ultimately did. New Hampshire was the 9th state to ratify the Constitution. But always also remember that each state developed its own Constitution, based largely on what had already been done in terms of the Constitution. New Hampshire even went a little further. They said, Congress shall make no laws touching religion or to infringe the rights of conscience. So remember those years ago with Obamacare. They were going to force religious organizations to pay for abortion. And they said, whoa, time out. So no, we can do that. And if everybody had simply rolled over for them, that's what would have happened. The little sisters of the poor, for all, stand up, the mighty little sisters of the poor said, no, we're not going to let you do that. Now, Biden says, I quote, I will institute everything back that was taken out of Obamacare. So that fight will go on. We will make you as a religious institution do what we tell you. Even though the First Amendment says you can make no laws in terms of no, as New Hampshire said, even touching religion. Madison spoke of a perfect separation and believed that religion and government will exist in greater purity without the aid of government. So, this is not in your notes, but as Samuel Livermore proposed the wording that was finally adopted, the one that's actually in the First Amendment in terms of religion. His was the writing that finally got accepted. They would go back and forth. This one would submit this, and this one would submit this, and they'd say no. They understand. They went down to every word, not just a phrase. To every word had to be finally right. Is what they finally came together to say. They believed this to be truly important, and that words mattered. Now, freedom of speech. That one. Again, drawing from, as all these did to some extent, drew from the English heritage and common law and so on. So there was this ongoing battle of how far we could let that go. So could an individual say anything, for instance, largely the battle was about, could they say anything about the government they wanted to? Would it not be libel and sedition and so forth? So this wrangling went on for a number of years, and they would rewrite things and try to rewrite things, and how do we handle this? And they'd get judicial rulings on it, just as they do today to some extent. But in the final analysis, when the dust settled, you in terms of individuals, you can be sued for libel and untruth. But in the final analysis, and we're seeing that, remember, with Nicholas Sandmann, the kid from Covington Catholic. God bless him. I hope he makes a gazillion dollars. Sues every network, and he's already taken down the Washington Post and somebody else. CNN, yeah. Yeah, I hope and he's going to speak Monday night at the convention. Hallelujah. That ought to ruffle some more feathers. Anyway, and not just simply because of money, but God bless the young man said, listen, we're not in his family, we're not going to put up with that. If you remember, that was all about the Native American that came banging that tambourine right up in his face. And everybody, everybody, but largely Fox didn't, but everybody else, CNN, Washington Post, everybody. They didn't take enough time to watch the whole thing. They judged, jury, and convicted him in a matter of just a few hours. Now, he hired one of the best law firms in the United States and said, we're coming after you. Now, their stance was freedom of speech. They fell right back to the First Amendment, freedom of speech. We as networks and print have freedom of speech. Well, they find, listen, you libeled this kid. You slandered this young man. You slandered his character. You're liable, and in effect, you were lying about him before you saw the whole thing. Because when you saw the whole thing, the kid just stood there. The aggressor was the Indian. So now, that on that level. But in terms of the government, they went back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. In the final analysis that seemed to come down and still, for the most part, stands today, is that since the government is supposed to be working for us, then largely you can say whatever you want to about them. And that happens every news cycle. You understand that every news cycle, there's lies that go out about politicians, again, on both sides of the fence, but still, the final viewpoint was, if we try to constrain that to the point where the government is going to tell you, then we don't have what we envisioned. That is a government that does not control you in what you say. So the press can lie about most anything in terms of the government and government officials. He did that, she did that, and so forth. They can say about that mayor this. Well, abjectly untrue, but they can do that and probably have done that, right? So that's that process they went through over and over and over again for years to try to figure out how far do we let this go? Can we, are we going to relegate people from saying certain things about the government? Is it going to be treasonous and so on and so forth? Is it libel? Is it slanderous? And it's largely come down to the fact that you can pretty much say everything you want to. Again, if it's going this direction like it was for Nick Sandmann, then that's a different story because they libeled this kid. But in terms of the government, now, here's the slippery slope that we're headed towards. Our friends to the north in Canada are already there. Our friend Brian Scott, who has been here 2 or 3 times and ministered. Words matter, right? Now the phrase is hate speech. And listen, they're going to pummel that just like they have fetus and undocumented alien. Hate speech, hate speech, hate speech, which will fly against the basic premise is you hear this analogy given. You can't yell fire in a theater. Right? That's kind of they always use that one. That's not free speech because you're going to get some folks killed trampling out of that building when there's no fire there. So you can't do that. But now, the hate speech police government will say, you can't say that. You can't say that about that group of people, even though the framers ultimately said, we may not like it. Largely, you won't like it at times. You won't like what is said. You won't like how it's said. But you can't. You have the right to say it, even if it's crazy. You have the right to say it. Right? Now you have Facebook, Google, Twitter saying, no, we will determine whether you can say that or not. And again, their position is we are a private entity, so we can guard that the way we want to. So they're going to continue to fall back on that till the government, if and when the government does something about it. But don't think that's not coming here. So they'll monitor what we say here, if that does come into place. And if you say homosexuality is a sin according to the Bible, that will be deemed hate speech. And you will be, or I will be, punished or jailed or fined or all the above for that. So what won't happen here? Well, you got to wake up and smell the coffee brewing from where we were 10 or 15 years ago to where we are right now. And maybe a whole lot of preachers and churches said that in Canada. All never happened here. Well, it has happened here. Hate speech is in place in Canada. You can't say that. You can't say 2 women cannot be married. Can't do that. Well, you can't say that in Canada. So that's where this is going. This will be the narrow framework of how you can control speech. That's where it's going, and well, a lot of things are important. Voltaire, whom I normally don't quote, he's not one of my favorite people in history to quote, because Voltaire said there'll come a point in time when the Bible will be dead, or God is dead, I should say. But he did say something profoundly true here. I disapprove of what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it. I completely disagree with what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it. This iPad is going crazy tonight. again, I'm certainly not a fan of Louis Farrakhan, the head of Nation of Islam. But under the First Amendment, he's got the right to spew out that stuff. We don't like it, do we? The framers understood there'd be some things we don't like, but we've placed it in our thoughts in terms of how it ought to function. The Second Amendment, the strongest reason for the people to retain the right to keep and bear arms is at last resort to protect themselves against tyranny in government. Thomas Jefferson. Now, notice what the Second Amendment says. We who are Second Amendment proponents normally don't quote the first part of the Second Amendment, though. Read it. A well-regulated militia, being necessary to the security of the free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. How many realize we never quote the first part of that? We just quote the second part.
But there are militias forming and they're not getting arrested.
No, I understand that, but we don't quote the first part.
Right.
Do we? Come on. Come on, you second. Listen, we got 77,000 guns in this room. Yes, a little bit. And I don't care all you people watching. We do have. We're Second Amendment. But it doesn't just jump down to the second part. Come on, don't let me lie. I didn't make this up. This is the Second Amendment. Now let's look at some of the wording here. Militia, an army composed of ordinary citizens rather than professional soldiers. Now, watch this now, though. In this amendment, did not give the right for a militia to rise up and try to overtake the government. That would be treason. They didn't give it that right. The militia was that you could form in case you had a tyrannical government that tried to take over. Right, tracking? Security, protection from attack or safety from danger of any kind. Arms, weapons of offense or armor for defense and protection of the body. Infringe, to limit or reduce someone's legal rights or freedom, whether by intervention or by fulfilling some duty. So, again, this goes back to the British. The British back in the 1600s were told every man from, I forget what the age was, from 15 on was to have a weapon other than a knife. You could have a knife, but you had to have more than that. Everyone, every male. That was the British mindset. Because at that point in time, they had no standing army of their own. So you blessed bed, God better protect yourself because there was no way to help you. And interesting, in when I'm studying this, they did random checks to see whether you actually had one. Not to take it away from you, but to make sure you did have one or more. By tracking. And it had to be more than a knife or a blade or a sword or whatever. So the U.S. commonly, they cited Blackstone. Remember William Blackstone, the lawyer jurist that was quoted very often in terms of the founders, stated in his commentaries that the right to have arms was indispensable to protect and maintain and violate these three great and primary rights. Number one, of personal security, of personal liberty and freedom, and private property. James Burr, I had not heard his name till studying this, wrote extensively on the subject. As a matter of fact, 100 pages to be exact. He went in depth on the right to have arms. He stated a militia man, meaning again, you had no, that point in the standing army, a militia man is a free citizen, a soldier, a slave for life. He referred to arms as the only true badges of liberty. So Burr said, listen, if you don't have a weapon, you're not going to be free. That was his stance. Pennsylvania's Constitution of 1776 first used the phrase the right to bear arms. That wasn't initially in what they were coming up with. Pennsylvania was the first to use the term the right to bear arms, even though it had no militia. So why do I say that? Because it had no military connotation when they're saying that. So they weren't using it as a military connotation. They were using it as private individuals. You have the right to bear arms. So again, no military connotation. In 1789, Madison proposed the first Congress the amendments that would become the Bill of Rights. He included one that was based on his own state's constitution, and it read as follows: "The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, a well-armed and well-regulated militia being the best security of a free country. But no person religiously scrupulous of being armed shall be compelled to render military service in person." Madison did not make the right of bearing arms conditional upon serving in the militia. In his personal letters, again, Madison referred to his amendments as the Guards for Private Rights. Understand that there was much argument with this amendment that went back and forth. You have to understand that the colonists at this point in time detested a freestanding army. Why did they? Because King George sent his army over here to strong arm the people of our nation into doing what he wanted, his own policies. So in effect, you had the British Army long before we'd engage with them in battle, redcoats over here dictating this. So they loathe freestanding armies. Now, ultimately, they're going to have one, and we do, but at that point in time, they looked at just the British Army that George had was sending over constantly. So that's how largely the aspect of militia, a well-armed but not government-controlled army, and needed to be armed themselves. So, Third Amendment, no soldier shall in time of peace be quartered in any house without the consent of the owner, nor in the time of war, but in the manner to be prescribed by law. That's number 3. Don't hear that one quoted too much, right? Fourth Amendment, where an excess of power prevails, property of no sort is duly respected. No man is safe in his opinions, his person, his faculties, or his possessions. Again, that's Madison. Let's look at some words here with this one. These are important. Secure, free from or not exposed to danger, risk, harm, or loss, safe. Paper, a document or documents showing somebody's identity or legal status. Person, the body of a living being, sometimes including the clothes being worn. Effects, somebody's personal possessions or the things that somebody is carrying on him or her. Unreasonable, exceeding what is acceptable and in agreement with common sense, claiming or insisting on more than is appropriate. Seizure, the act of taking something by force or the legal taking of something that belongs to somebody else. Violate, to break or ignore a law, agreement, etc. Oath, a formal and legally binding promise of the truth or one's words so that one will do as one says, usually upon God as a witness. Here's the amendment. The right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches. Underscore that. Unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrants shall issue but upon probable cause. Jumped again. No warrant shall issue but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the person or things to be searched. The Fourth Amendment was a constitutional embodiment and expansion of an earlier combination of the Magna Carta with the belief that a man's house is what? His castle. We've all heard that, right? That goes all the way back in British law. So they believed that it made no difference whether that man lived in a 400-square-foot shanty. That was his home, and his home was just as protected as the landed gentry who lived in that castle. That's where that phrase came from, that a man's house is his castle. Now, it goes back to the roots of the Magna Carta, but that had been abused by the British. There was a point in time when they could come into your home for any reason. If they decided they were going to do it for any reason, they could do it. So again, they had seen that, didn't want that to be the case here. The Fourth Amendment was an unprecedented liberalization of search and seizure law, using the broadest language ever known at the time. Broadest language ever known at that point. It was a bold milestone in the advancement of the common people from slaves of the crown to sovereign individuals who were not subject to the oppressive whims of an all-intentioned authorities. So simply what that says, they can't, if they're going to come into your home, right, they're going to have to go before a judge and get what? A warrant. And there has to be what? Probable cause. And it better be right in terms of, so if that judge has granted them the right to inspect your house, but they find things in your car, but you didn't give you the warrant to check their car. They wanted the protection on the extreme side. Remember, the wording of this was far more expansive than anything ever written to that point. So we've heard and seen of those, right, where maybe well-intentioned but aggressive police crews will say, we know this guy's dirty, so they make a seizure that they had no warrant to do so, and
It
gets thrown out. And we get kind of, if we're not careful, we go, the guy wasn't dirty. He was dirty as could be. But our founders looked back and said, listen, you're going to miss some in that, but we sure don't want this abused. That's why we're doing this. We don't want the government to come in at their own whim just because it's a Tuesday and it's raining, we're going to raid your house or your establishment, your business establishment or whatever, without any probable cause. The Fifth Amendment, no person shall be held to answer for a capital or otherwise infamous crime on a presentation or indictment of a grand jury except in cases arising in the land or naval forces or in the militia when in actual service in time of war or public danger, nor shall any person be subject for the same offense to be twice put in jeopardy. What's that called? Double jeopardy. So what does that mean? If that individual, man or woman, is found not guilty of that crime, doesn't make any difference how much evidence comes to light afterwards, right? I, of course, was always interested in law, and that's what I was. If I couldn't play baseball, I was going to be a lawyer. And about a year and a half into college, I thought, I'm not going to do this. I don't want to. I can get out of here magna cum me in 72, I'm gone. So whether I play baseball or not, but anyway, but I've always been interested. I'm fascinated by it. I was absolutely, if I could get home in the afternoon or I'd watch the recaps of it, of the O.J. Simpson trial. I was just captivated by that, I just have to say. Now, I mean, I understand that Simpson could have got up 3 days after that and said, I killed them both. Could he have been tried for that? Not on a criminal basis, he couldn't. So what did they do? The family went after him civilly and won that, right? Couldn't come after him. That's the double jeopardy. Couldn't be, they could find all kinds of evidence. Just as an aside, Quinn's back here. Your friend Steve, his dad was a detective, wasn't he? Big Steve. LAPD. He was in LAPD, but he had friends who were guys that worked the Simpson case. He said there were mounds more of evidence that never saw the light of day. Never saw the light of day. Do you know one of the detectives on that case moved to Switzerland County several years ago? Guess he just wanted to get out of the fray. I forget which the name was, but one of the lead detectives, of all places, he ends up in Switzerland County. Talk about escape. But it was in Quinn Katie's wedding, and a good friend of his dad was a LAPD, and he had friends who worked that case, the Simpson case. Said, there were found three blood down Simpson's drain in his bathroom. His, hers, and the young man's. But they were not able to ever get that shown. Anyway, that's a whole other ball of wax. But I was fascinated by that. I was glued to how they're doing this and how they're presenting this. But again, let's get back to the amendment. Nor shall be compelled in any criminal case to be a witness against himself. What's that mean? If you're the defendant, they cannot make you testify. Right. Because again, back to the British and the abuse of that in England, they would coerce individuals to say certain things, and you watch some of that in terms now of not being witnesses in a trial, but if they bait you into saying something wrong, and then they'll say you lied to the FBI, and there you go. Can't handle the truth. Yeah, another classic line there. Woo-hoo. Deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. That's a broad one there, though, just compensation. The government gets to determine, right, or try to determine what the just compensation is. Okay, everybody clear on that one? Again, a lot more we could talk about. 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th, these are just kind of one bullet point. New age of justice on the 6th Amendment, the 7th Amendment, the power of the jury, the 8th Amendment, equal and fair justice for all, the 9th, power of the people. So let's end with the 10th, and then we're going to look at some things we can do from here, since this is the last night together. The powers delegated to the proposed Constitution of the federal government are few and defined. Again, we've talked about that over and over again, especially last week when we were dealing with the states. Those which are to remain in state governments are numerous and indefinite. James Madison again. So here's the amendment. The powers delegated to the United States by the Constitution nor prohibited by it to the states are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. Novel thought. So the powers of the federal government were to be limited and well-defined, and the power and authority of the states were to be broad and numerous, and to the people themselves. We've drifted so far away from that. So where do we go from here? Let me just kind of give you some closing thoughts in these last couple of minutes we've got. Number one, continue to educate yourself on the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. Remember what Jefferson said, the true antidote is a well-informed mass of people that know what the Constitution is and the Bill of Rights, what they are and what they mean. And when we don't have that, if we have an ignorant populace of people that don't know, then you have all kinds of problems. Number two, make sure that you discover where every candidate for any office from local to the federal levels stands in terms of the Constitution. And boy, you better push them on that. Don't tell them that, because all of them are going to say, yeah, we believe in the Constitution. So what do you think about this? What do you think about that? Just don't settle for the fact they say, oh yeah, we believe in the Constitution. Then vote for those men and women who hold to those constitutional truths. Make sure. And if that means you do not vote the way you've always voted, you better bless God, change your position. I'm appalled at some believer stance on what they say they believe and then how they vote. Say, come on, people. Or not vote at all. Yeah, that's. And listen, I've got friends in that category, and if it's certain things are more sure and true to them than the Bible, like, wow. I don't know how necessarily. Anyway, I'll leave it at that. Number 3, to use a biblical term, to be ready to give an answer. That's what Paul told Timothy. Be ready to give an answer. So we hope that we've equipped you enough not to be constitutional experts, but so you can not argue with people, but you can calmly and quietly and lovingly point out, that's not what that says. That's not what that means. Because again, they've heard all kinds of words. Lots of, in many cases, not accurate. In other words, engage with people on the topic of the Constitution, what the framers' original intent was, and our God-given rights. Number 4, parents and grandparents, teach your children and grandchildren these truths. Tish mentioned this lady last week. Her name is Chris Ann Hall. She's a constitutional expert in Florida. She teaches everywhere. So last week's material was largely taken out of her book. I can't remember what it's titled. But she has done a very good job of writing material for children on the Constitution at their level. So you go to Chris Ann Hall. And I didn't know all of her testimony, still only part of it. She was a bleeding heart atheist. I mean, by her own admission, she was as hardcore as you could find, believed in everything, women's rights, abortion, same-sex marriage, on and on and on and on, and did not believe in God. But God not only got through to her at a miraculous conversion, but then launches her out. She is one of the best constitutional who can bring it down to where it can be understood. Not in this, you have the Dershowitzes of the world who are great lawyers, but you can't understand them much of the time. So in terms of teaching your kids and grandkids, look up Chris Ann Hall. She's in Florida. Number 5, work within your schools to get these teachings back into the classrooms. My friend, I'm sure watching, he texts me every night when I get home. That's Ken, I'm sure you're watching, but Ken Cleater, he texts me every night when I get home. He asked about this in terms of the schools, and I pointed him to Wall Builders and David Barton. They have had some measure of success in getting constitutional teaching into the schools. So you as parents, I'm not saying that will be easy, but his team at Wall Builders, he and his son and others, and the lawyers that help them, because they're not, David Barton's not a lawyer, have had success in some extent in that. Listen, we either roll over, say it, que sera, sera, it is what it is, not much we can do about it, or we pull out, which, I mean, certainly nothing wrong with that necessarily either, but if you're going to stay in the fracas of the public school system, you're probably going to have to do some fighting. But arm yourself with the right tools to do that. Number 6, the Lord may be calling you into the political mountain. If he is, be obedient to that divine call and understand it is as much of a divine call as into what we call ministry, right? Sure is. I was watching Johnny Enlow, who may be one of the best teachers on the 7 mountains, the 7 cultural movers, and he was on Sid Roth this week. He said, the world is coming to an end as we know it. And you think that's bad. And he said, no. He said, what the Lord spoke to me is the world's coming to an end like we know it. And it's coming to a kingdom place. Not the compromised, pew-sitting, blah, blah, blah Christians of today, but coming into a kingdom mindset in which we're going to penetrate these mountains. Because the one that he uses the term Leviathan, you'll find that in the Old Testament. I taught on that back before the last election, I think, on a Friday night. That Leviathan controls the Media Mountain. Controls it. That's why they can say what they say on a constant basis and never be challenged basically by anybody, because they control that mountain. And I've said, no, I'm getting off, but I got one minute. We basically 180 years ago said Jesus is coming in the next 5 minutes, so we're going to abandon all the mountains with the exception of the religious mountain and the church and the family mountain. We let all the rest of them go. You can just flat go to hell because we're out of here. It was one of the most egregious philosophies, and I'll call it philosophy, not a doctrine, because they were good men and women who believed that. But what the results were, we left those mountains. We left them. You understand, those mountains are controlled by a small percentage of people. A small percentage. They're not 50% of those people, of those mountains being controlled by pagans. There's just a small amount, but they're at the top. They're at the very top of those mountains. Education, media, arts and entertainment, economics, and so on. So he saw, this Johnny Enlow, he said, I saw a vision of the church to 2050. He said, I don't know if that's right or not. I'm not bantering anything. Well, where church is going to be. He said, I saw the church at 2050 altogether different on the top of these mountains. Because whoever controls the top of the mountain controls the messaging, the words, back again to words, what they'll accept, what they won't accept. So if he's calling you to any of those other mountains, whether that's media, some of you, especially some of our young people, they may be called that arts and entertainment mountain, which arts and entertainment is essentially controlled by pagans, pathological pagans, like Harvey Weinstein. That's sad, but listen, if we said, they're all going to hell, let them go to hell, I'm out of here. You can have, listen, you can have good people have very bad theology. Doesn't mean they're bad people, but you can have good people that have horrible theology. But always understand, theology always has some measure of impact. Always does. It's not neutral. In other words, if it's really good, it should have really good impact. If it's really lousy theology, even by good people, you're going to have some really horrible results. And we've had some. Anyway, I'm getting off of him. Let's pray. Father, thank you, Lord, for the time we've had in these 11 weeks. I pray for all of us, those here at the church and those who've been a part of the live streaming over these weeks, have been educated, been equipped, but more than that, have been inspired to go deeper and deeper and better and further into this wonderful topic and who we are as a nation and what we still can be as a nation. What not only the framers wanted for us, but what the Lord wants for us as well, too. We thank you for that, Father. Use us over the course of these next days before we gather again this Sunday, and may we be kingdom people in the midst of it, Father. In Jesus' name, amen. Don't forget, this is in the bookstore. Documents. We'll see you Sunday, but we'll see you back here on Wednesdays in 2 weeks. Syllabus is on the table.